right, welcome to a new episode of Athletics for Life podcast. We're your hosts, Jeff and CD, and we like to interview guests to talk about the lessons learned through sports. And we're trying something new this year. We got kind of sick of being pent up in and stuck in Mongolia, not being able to travel. So we decided to use our podcast as an avenue to travel around Asia and interview different athletic directors, trying to get somebody from as many different countries as we can. So Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about our guest for today?
Yeah, and the easiest flight that we can take from Ulaanbaatar is going to Korea. So we're going off to South Korea today, to Seoul. We're interviewing Paul Rader today, the director of sports at the Seoul Foreign School. I met Paul through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great, platform that you can connect with different people, and we have similar friends on LinkedIn, or connections, how they call them. So I just asked Paul to come on the podcast today, to be our first guest in our travel show. So we're off to Seoul City. Very excited to hear about Paul, what he's doing, his philosophy, the conferences, and of course the impact COVID had on his programs.
All right, let's do it.
Let's go to Paul.
So why don't we get started? Paul, if you could just give us a quick introduction, kind of for anyone watching, where you're from, and where you're at, and kind of what you do.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Paul Rader, and I'm the director of sports at Seoul Foreign School. I've been at Seoul Foreign for 7 years, so this is my start of my 8th year. I was at Daejeon Christian International School for 5 years before this, so this is year 13, working back in Korea. I'm originally from the US, but I actually grew up overseas and attended Seoul Foreign School growing up all through my schooling years. And my parents worked at Seoul Foreign, and my dad was a coach and athletic director here. So sort of following in the family footsteps in this role. So.
Oh, that's
it's
very
interesting.
Yeah.
Because I'm from the States, I'm from a small town, and you see that there, where like you'll have families of teachers or people that went to the high school, and they go to the high school, now they teach at the high school.
Yeah.
You don't see that very often in the international schools.
No, it's pretty unusual. But our school, actually, we have a handful of alumni that are back working here. And actually, I've had a number of family members that have worked back at Seoul Foreign School through the years. So it's pretty cool. Like right now, my dad's older sister and her husband still work here. They've been working here for 35 years.
Wow.
My dad's younger sister worked here in the 90s, and then she actually just came back this year. My older sister worked here a few years ago. So yeah, this is a special place for our family, and especially we've been living overseas for such a long time. It's kind of a home away from home.
And why Seoul Foreign? Is that just because the school is so good and nice to work at? Korea? Is there a reason for it that you all went back to Seoul Foreign?
I mean, I think, originally the school was a small school, it was a missionary school, for many years of its history. And my grandparents came out to Korea in the 60s as missionaries with the Salvation Army. And so that's why we had the original connection to the school. My dad and my aunts actually attended the school as students in the 60s and 70s. And then they went back to the States for university, became teachers, coaches, those sorts of things. And then when they went back overseas, I guess they had the connection here at Seoul Foreign. And so they ended up coming back here. So it's sort of been a thread through all of our lives for the last 40, 50 years for our family. So the school, I guess there was a connection with the university we went to. A lot of us have attended a small Christian school in Kentucky. And that school tends to produce teachers and missionaries and doctors and people who are going into sort of service fields. And so, a lot of teachers actually from the school, especially back when it was a missionary school, a lot of teachers from that university, would come over here and teach for a few years, sort of as almost like a mission work thing. The school has obviously changed a lot. Now it's a big international school. And that transformation sort of been happening over the last, I would say 20, 30 years. And now obviously it's a big school in the region and kind of well-known, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, I love working here, just the personal connection that I have and my time spent here. But then I also think it's a great school. great place to work. I love the community, and I personally appreciate the connection with the history of the school. And but I also appreciate that the school is quite innovative and moving forward at the same time. So professionally, personally, there's a lot of things that I love about this place. So.
And how did you get involved in being the AD there? I think you mentioned your dad was the athletic director. Did that kind of spur you in that direction, or is it something that just sort of happened that you became the AD? Like how did that work out?
Well, I think it goes back to sort of that, choosing a career. I knew that I wanted to be involved in teaching and coaching, and I knew that I wanted to live back overseas somewhere. I think at that point I was totally open to going anywhere. When I was in college, I was open. And then I ended up getting my first opportunity at TCIS in Daejeon. And that was just sort of actually was pretty random. And I was actually kind of disappointed, like, oh man, I'm going back to Korea. I thought I could go somewhere else and try kind of a new experience. But then that student teaching, that was almost like a month-long interview for a job. And the next year they had a position. So they asked me to apply, and I was accepted in the position there. Started teaching high school English, and then was coaching on the side. So I jumped right in. I assistant coached on the cross country team. I assistant coached the varsity basketball. And then the next year, the coach for the basketball team left. So I took over as the varsity coach, and I switched over and I actually helped with tennis. So in a few short years, I kind of was fully invested into coaching and teaching. And then I think it was my third year there, the guy who had been the AD at TCIS for probably 20 years, he was leaving. And so he was like, hey, I think you should apply for this job. You've been coaching and doing all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I was like 23, 24 at the time. So I put my name in, applied for it, and they gave me the job. And I chalk that up more to, TCIS is a small school, so they really have to build their leadership from within. And so I think the head of school, took a chance on me. And so I'm really grateful for that, because I was really young and inexperienced, and definitely made a lot of mistakes in those first years. So that's sort of how I got into becoming an AD. I don't think I necessarily envisioned that originally, even though my dad had done that kind of work. And then when I came up to SFS 7 years ago, I came up as a high school English teacher, and again, just threw myself into coaching. There wasn't an AD position at the time, and I was okay with that. I was actually happy to be transitioning back into the classroom. I miss teaching. And then I think they created this new role. It used to be we had sectional ADs, and then they created this role of a director of sport, which was a school-wide position. So a much larger kind of admin role at the school. And I applied for it, but I didn't get it the first time. So I was like, okay, didn't get it. That's fine. I'll just keep coaching, keep teaching. And then when it came open a few years later, I applied again, and then I got the position that time. So yeah, that's kind of how it happened here at SFS. And now I've been doing, this is my third year. Unfortunately, more than half of that time has been impacted by COVID, but I had about 7 months fully under the pump with the school-wide role. So it was intense. It was really intense. And it's been intense since then, just in different ways, but different challenges. So
yeah, we definitely want to hear about that soon. So your role is director of sports. Does that mean athletics, activities, PE department? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I oversee all three of those areas. So as far as sports, sort of sports teams, representation teams, I oversee that, and then oversee what we call our SWEP, which is our school-wide extracurricular program, which is sort of like ASAs. So I oversee that program in the school. And then I also oversee the PE department. So thankfully I have good support at the school. Like I have a administrative assistant who helps with all of the sports related aspects. We have a SWEP coordinator who works with me, who oversees the after school program and, does all the behind the scenes work with that program. And then in PE, I have a head of department who I work with. So even though it is overseeing a lot of pretty large areas, I definitely have a great support network working with me on the team. So that makes it possible. If I didn't have that kind of support, there's no way I could oversee all those areas. It would be just too much detail work.
Yeah, because I was wondering, because it's a big school now, right? So it's a lot
Yeah.
of work, a lot of kids, a lot of teams, big conferences. How
Yeah.
do you manage all that? Do you have any specific skills or things you've learned along the way? You said we've been locked down for a long time, so you're only 7 months.
Yeah.
Was there a difficult transitioning from classroom teaching to managing all these different departments?
Yeah, it's definitely a different role. And when I was at TCIS, I was the high school athletic director, and then I was the APAC coordinator, which APAC is our international conference that SFS is actually also a part of. And I really didn't have any administrative support at all. So it was pretty much all on my own doing it. And so, yeah, there were a lot of things that were very time consuming. I would say, like, we play against the DoD military schools, so for every time you go, you have to create an access list and you have to collect all this information. And it's not hard work. It's just very time consuming. So thankfully, I would say in the role I have here now, one of the things I've had to get better at is delegating tasks and just making sure that the time that I am spending on work is working on things that really only I should be doing or only I can do, within the team, and trying to delegate tasks to other people that, I would say are, in some cases, sometimes it's the more behind the scenes work, logistical cross-referencing, collecting information, that kind of thing. So that would say that was a learning curve though, because there are definitely things that I still wanted to. I think all athletic directors are a little bit of maybe a little bit OCD, a little bit controlling as far as as wanting to have their finger on things, and so some of it has been, learning to trust other people more, relinquish that, and just say, this is what I'm looking for, this is what I need, and checking back in later and going from there, rather than standing over someone's shoulder or having to do it myself. And I would say that's gotten easier over time, just as I've built the relationships with the people I'm working with. They know me better. They know what I'm expecting when I explain things, so that's really, really helped. But yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve. The school has about 1,500 kids. So it's quite a bit bigger than my previous school, which was when I was at TCIS, it was around 550, I think. So, and we didn't have I wasn't doing anything with middle school or elementary school or anything. So, yeah, it was definitely I would say a step up as far as the scope of what I was working on. And definitely there's times when it feels too big, and I'm getting pulled in a lot of different directions. So yeah, that's sort of it.
So I'm curious, now you've been there for a few years, and how do you, or it's kind of an open-ended question. Like what's your philosophy about sports, and how do you kind of instill your vision in the program? Even like you said, you have to delegate to other people. How do you kind of lead your program in the way that you want it?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting when you are overseeing lots of different types of programs within the same school, and they might all fall under the category of sports, for instance, but the nature of the activity is quite different. So for instance, like an after school activities program, let's just say like a Saturday soccer with a group of second graders who are working on skill development. Obviously you still want the coaches to embody the values and the character traits that you're wanting from your coaches, and you want them to treat the kids in the way that you would want any teacher or coach to treat them. But maybe it's not as emphasized because you're seeing those kids for a short period of time. The emphasis of it is not necessarily a team thing, so I definitely think that different activities sort of have different ways in which those like overall values of a program sort of come through. So for instance, in the sweat program, the after school, it's really about participation, enjoyment. We want kids to be able to experience a range of different types of sports and activities, and hopefully have a good time while they're doing it, so that they continue their interest in staying healthy and active. But the purpose of that program is not to build athletes, or like, we're trying to really, it's just a different focus, right? And you might have a kid who's pretty serious in that group, and you might have a kid who it's their first time trying out the sport, so that makes it really difficult, I would say. But as far as overall, like, I do think that the sports teams, the high school sports teams, sort of set the tone in many ways for a lot of the other programs. And because those groups are more intensive, the coaches are spending an intensive amount of time and a significant amount of time with the kids that they're coaching. I'm spending a significant amount of time with those coaches, leading them. So I sort of see that as the main core, and then things sort of emanate out from there. So for me, it's important that what we're doing as an athletics department supports the overall mission and direction of the school, right? I don't think that a sports department within the school should have wildly different goals, or, not really fit within the whole program. So, for me, it is important that our school is offering a holistic educational experience for the kids, right? So if sports is becoming maybe too much in their life, too much of it, then they can't have a holistic experience. It might negatively impact other areas. So there has to be a balance, like where sports fits within the bigger picture of our kids' experience at the school. It is a significant part of their experience. And I would say most times the fight for ADs is more the other direction. You're trying to make, this is significant. It needs to be a bigger part of their life. We need to value this more as a school, as a community, those sorts of things. And thankfully here, like we've had a strong sports culture going back for many, many years. So for the kids, it's important. For the parents, it's important. The school recognizes the significance of the sports program and the overall development of kids and their educational experience here. So thankfully, all those things do align. And I think our mission does align with the overall school. But for instance, we have an overall kind of slogan or motto as a school: inspiring excellence, building character. So that's a school-wide slogan and motto that we've had now for over 10 years. And so I definitely try, and for me, that is a tighter encapsulation of a longer mission statement, which sometimes there's just a lot of phrases and words and, that kind of teacherese, educationese kind of thing. But excellence and character are things we can kind of focus on a bit more. So we do talk about that a lot. I definitely, kind of a newer thing that I instituted was at the very beginning of each season, calling all of the teams together. So for instance, in the fall, it'd be tennis, volleyball, cross country. They're all coming into the gym. All the coaches are coming into the gym. And then I'm talking through expectations for the program, significance of being a part of a team, their responsibility as ambassadors for the school, talking through what excellence and character means in the sports program, talking about what we as coaches, what our purpose is, why we do what we do, what we hope to gain. So kind of just getting everybody on the same page around what are our values, why are we doing what we're doing, why does this matter? And trying to put the emphasis on the right place at the beginning of the season for everybody. And I think I found that that's sort of helped, I think, create a culture where the coaches have a better understanding of what we're trying to do. Obviously each coach is different. They bring something different to how they lead their respective teams, and they're the ones on the ground building relationships with kids every single day in practice and in games. So again, there is some trust there. Like I have to trust them to lead well, lead their teams well and to coach well. But I do have, like you said, I have that responsibility to make sure that I am working with them to constantly, I guess, reinstill why are we doing this? What matters? What's in the big picture? So it's been a little harder with COVID, I'd say, because the rhythms of the natural seasons have been kind of thrown off. But like at the end of last year, we had a big coaches meeting with the high school coaches and sat down and looked at excellence and character and trying to figure out, what does this actually mean? We talk about it, but what is it? What are the issues that our students tend to have related to character? And trying to do a bit more to identify those things so that as we start this year, we can have a collective emphasis on, for instance, if accountability is an issue, right? Accountability is a huge part of character. So let's emphasize that as a group. This is something we're going to have a collective kind of stance on, that we're going to be talking about with our teams, that sort of thing.
Very interesting that you put the coaches and the kids together. might be something that I'm going to implement. Actually, I think that's a good one. I'd like to hear more what you do with the coaches, what kind of meetings do you have, and what do you do with the parents? How do you approach that?
Sure. Yeah, I wish I had more time with the coaches, honestly. I think we're in international schools. Most of our coaches are also teachers in the school, right? So, and in my case, most of my teachers do come from the high school. We're running MYP and DP, and most teachers teach across both. And so the expectations on them in their professional world, what they're here to do, they're here to be classroom teachers, they have a lot of expectations on them. So I don't feel like I can necessarily call on them for tons of meetings, and, just getting everybody together for even a few meetings throughout the year is pretty tough. But for the in-season coaches, I always try to have, a preseason meeting with everybody where we gather as a group. And I generally do that with all the teams. So it'd be like the volleyball coaches, tennis coaches, cross-country coaches, again, just to have those times when we can sort of say, as a group, we're a program. These are separate teams within the school and within SFS sports, but we're one group. We're supporting each other, and trying to emphasize that program aspect. So we have that meeting. I'll regularly be in communication with coaches throughout the season. I definitely, after school, I tend to just circle around and spend time going through practices and just being present. And sometimes I have to have side conversations with coaches because I'm going around saying, hey, so the bus time was supposed to be 1:30, but can you tell the kids it's 2, that sort of stuff. But generally I'm just kind of actually just getting out of the office and enjoying seeing what all the work is for. Right. So that, I would say that's the main thing. I definitely keep lines of communication open. We've instituted a few tools, I think, that have been helpful. We have what we call the Monday email. So at the beginning of each week, we send out to the kids, coaches, parents, sort of the big, here's all the things going on this week. It's separated by sport, when are the buses, uniform colors, all this kind of stuff. And try to get that out at the beginning of the week, so everyone sort of is on the same page with the information. With the parents, we communicate at the beginning of the season with sort of a big, I guess it's like a departmental welcome letter with tons of information that they'll need throughout the year. We invite them to be present at the games, come out and support. And before COVID, since COVID, obviously we haven't been able to do this, but we did parent meetings. So for instance, the volleyball teams, our first home game, I asked all the parents, please come, and I want to meet all the parents, and I want the parents to meet the coaches. And so we had sort of a stand-up meeting in a classroom in the gym building. And it was probably like 20 minutes, 15 minutes. It was just a chance for me to introduce myself to the parents, for the coaches to introduce themselves, and for the parents to kind of see each other and meet each other. And because of the way I presented it as sort of I didn't say like it's required or your kid's off the team, but it was presented as a mandatory meeting. So it got all the parents in, they all watched one game together. And we're also fortunate. We have pretty good parent support for our games. So, but there's always, there's always going to be those parents who are not quite as involved or coming in. So that was a way to sort of get them all in the door. We also had started to build up our parent boosters. And that was it was going really well, actually, the first 2 sports seasons. And then again, with COVID, it's sort of thrown everything off. But that was another way that parents were sort of getting involved. We were asking the parents to volunteer to help out with concession sales at the games. And so they sort of created their own parent network of pressure to come out and support the sports program. And that group had the vision of, through the concession sales, giving back into the sports program. So we were, eventually going to hopefully have sort of a, gift from the parent boosters. They might, sponsor the scoreboard or something, and then there'd be something up there, gift from the parent boosters, that sort of thing. It was nothing revolutionary. We just didn't have anything like that before. So, that was all going pretty well.
So you mentioned kind of the wrench that COVID threw into everything. I'm curious, what did it look like in Seoul, and kind of what ramifications does that have now, like for next year?
Yeah. So I'm in charge of kayak, which is our local league here in Korea. So we have 17 schools that are a part of kayak, 3 divisions. And so I became the kayak president the year after COVID hit. So COVID hit in, February, March of 2019. So we had a few months there where basically all of our schools were online, virtual. All of the programs were canceled, essentially not running. And then at the very end of that year, the person who was the president was leaving. They were a Dodds person, and they were moving back home, or they were retiring. So they put it forward, and I ended up becoming the president of the league. And so really my main responsibility that summer was, okay, how do we figure out return to play protocols, right? Because at that time, Korea, I'm trying to remember if they've come out with now, I think 5 or 6 different social distancing scales, which has been a challenge, because every time they change the scale, it means basically redoing everything, because all our policy documents are like, if it's level 2, then this, if it's level 3, then this. And so when it changes, it's like, well, now level 2 is no longer level 2. Mm-hmm. So, we worked at the beginning there. I was looking at documents that were coming out of the States from NFHS. I was looking at documents on the CDC, was looking at documents from New Zealand, Australia, because I think they were a little bit further ahead as far as resuming sports. So kind of taking all those documents and working with the ADs here in Korea, we put together a proposal for a COVID-19 return to play guidelines and expectations. And we had meetings with the heads of school from all of the schools, presenting our plan for return of play for inter-school competition. And we started off that year. So this is not, I guess it's last year. Yeah, the beginning of last year, we started off with we didn't know if we were going to be able to play inter-school. We had this plan, which was pretty well fleshed out. But there was no chance we were going to be able to play, just because the conditions were not good enough yet. So everyone sort of got their teams going internally, but there was really no hope. We started doing some virtual cross-country things. So cross-country was actually doing pretty well, because they were just running on campus, and they were doing some virtual competitions. And so for a while there, that was really the only sport that was going. The other sports were just practicing, basically. And then around, I want to say it was actually very beginning of October, the social distancing level dropped down to the point where we were able to do inter-school competition. So basically we had about 3 weeks where played a number of games, kind of a condensed season. And then we played a kayak tournament, which was, our official tournament. And so it was kind of a whirlwind, but we were able to actually get the whole season in, which was pretty special. It was pretty exciting that we were able to do that. And that felt like a huge accomplishment. Like we were loving it. And then winter season came along and sort of started under the same situation. It was still, level 1.5, which at that time meant we could do inter-school competitions. And then right at the beginning of December, it jumped to level 2, and they actually said all schools need to go virtual. So basketball season was basically 2 weeks and just ended, and we never resumed basketball season. So, and then spring season was sort of similar, although it was the same challenges, but we were able to play some games and able to do a tournament, so the kids did get some competition. I think we probably all know, like for the high school sports, especially, like inter-school competition is the lifeblood of those sports, the competitive aspect. So not really being able to do that has been really difficult.
When was the last time you traveled for APAC?
So it would have been the fall season of 2019, because I'm the basketball coach, and the winter season of 2019 going into 2020, things started to pick up here. I guess we started to hear about the virus in January, and then February even, they ended up canceling the kayak tournaments, which were the first weekend in February. And APAC was supposed to be the following week, but that ended up getting canceled as well. We had started to like shift things around because I think it was supposed to be in China initially. And of course, China was in a bad position at that point. So yeah, we ended up trying to shift things around, make it work, but in the end, it just wasn't possible. We were also supposed to host a, massive Fobasia swimming tournament that weekend. And Fobasia is the British schools in the region. We have a British school on our campus as well. And so that was that was all set. We probably had 400 or 500 people supposed to be coming to our school, and we had to cancel that. And everybody, it was interesting. We definitely got a lot of flack for canceling that event. Just from around, because people had paid, it was a mess. It was a big deal to cancel. But the thing that's been pretty cool, I would say, or affirming, on multiple fronts, like the decision to cancel that tournament obviously was the right decision. And everybody knows that now in retrospect. The COVID-19 guidelines and expectations that we created for kayak pretty much have, all the things that we did. And some of those things we just didn't know. We were creating it based on our own kind of, doing our best we could. And so many of those things have kind of become standard practice. So it's felt good in that sense to kind of know, like, okay, we did this the best way we could, we feel like, so.
Yeah, that'd be a tough situation to have to, make the call to cancel a tournament.
Yeah. Wow.
I was organizing a basketball tournament, but we had teams from China supposed to come to Mongolia. And so Mongolia was relatively safe, I guess, at the time. There wasn't COVID here. But then none of the schools from China could travel. So it kind of got canceled for me. I didn't have to make the call to cancel it because we would have been the only team there.
Right.
What about for this year? What does it look like as far as travel and games, tournaments, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's hard to know. Like our kayak group is meeting on Wednesday. And to be honest, we don't really have better information to be working with now. The information, I was talking about the levels changing. The levels changed again this summer. So we're now sort of waiting on the Ministry of Education to come out with their, they always come out with sort of a corresponding document to the new levels, which are for schools. And so, yeah, we're waiting kind of to see what comes out from that. They've said on September 6th, they want more students back in school, just nationwide, just because Korean schools have had students out as well for a long time. So there's a lot of pressure to get kids back in schools. But obviously with the Delta variant now becoming more prevalent, and Korea's vaccination rates has actually been pretty slow, it feels like. Although this summer they did prioritize vaccinating teachers. So pretty much all our teachers in the international schools should be vaccinated by the end of this month. So there's all those factors. I think we're all sort of preparing our teams as if we'll be able to have some sort of season, like we did last year, hopefully at least a few friendly games, maybe a tournament at the end. That's kind of the hope. But at this point, it's sort of, no one has a crystal ball. So we're all kind of just doing the best we can. My theme sort of last year and going into this year has just been stay ready. So that's something I put in my emails to all the kids and the parents, like, we don't know what's going to happen, but we want to stay ready, so when opportunity presents itself, we're organized, we have a plan, we're good to go, as best as we can be. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. That's for sure. But we want to give ourselves that opportunity when it comes. So, yeah.
It sounds actually pretty similar to our situation, CD, here in Mongolia, right? Timing and then waiting for games and then shutting down. It sounds very similar, actually.
Yeah.
What has been your biggest takeaway from this whole experience, from the whole COVID lockdowns changing, and what's been your biggest learning experience?
I think probably the biggest thing is just realizing how many things we take for granted. Just the opportunity to compete. Like we've sort of taken that for granted, I think, for many years. And For me, it's made me think more about like, what is the purpose of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Maybe slowing down a bit, from in some ways pulling competition off of the table and kind of thinking about, well, actually the reason we have these teams is for kids to have a great experience, and to stay physically fit, to be active, to connect with teammates, to learn from coaches. There's all these underlying reasons that are actually so much more important, I think, than, sort of the win-loss column. And I think sometimes in that when you're in the midst of a season and the competitive flow, it can be hard to keep that in mind, and I think especially for like a school like ours, where we have a long sports tradition and sort of consider ourselves that we have a tradition of being successful, that it's sort of what defines our success, and I don't know that that's a question we necessarily have had to ask so kind of in such a kind of barefaced way, as we have had to during COVID. So I've definitely noticed a big difference in how really everybody is towards sports and activities. Everyone's just so happy when we're able to do anything, whereas some of the issues I dealt with pre-COVID, looking back at them, I'm like, wow, a lot of those things were very petty or selfish or narrow-minded or, completely off base with what we're trying to do. So I guess the big thing, and this is the challenge, I'm struggling with, it's like trying to turn this into, opportunities for improvement, opportunities for growth for our program. While also trying to, and I have to acknowledge, like, something's going to be lost too, as much as we're going to add from this, like we're losing a lot. And, for instance, in my school, the thing that really hit me last year as a basketball coach, I've been coaching for 6 years of varsity. We've built our program and our culture, and, guys walk in the gym and they know what to expect. They know me, they know what I expect, all these kinds of things. And they have sort of that healthy, I think, pressure of tradition and legacy and expectation. And then last year, like, we didn't even have a season. So it's, all those 9th and 10th graders on the JV, like, they didn't get an opportunity to practice every day with the 11th and 12th graders or the varsity kids. So they didn't get a chance to see, like, this is what practice is. This is what, this is how you handle a tough loss. This is how you, celebrate a win. This, all those kind of cultural pieces were sort of lost, So I kind of view it as like, this season I'm starting over, the culture that I built, I'm effectively having to rebuild that now, which, again, there's positives there. I can, I'm older now, hopefully a little wiser, can maybe start it off a little bit differently, but still it's tough. And that's just a microcosm of the larger program. So
you've been an AD in multiple roles, and even like you said, this year with basketball specifically, you've got to kind of start fresh. What are some tips and advice that you have for some athletic directors that are maybe starting fresh, whether it's at a new school or maybe they've been at a school and they're just starting as the athletic director, kind of like you have? What should they do, and kind of how can they be more successful?
When I think, I guess if this is just going back to like when I first started out, and I was quite young when I started, but I think the biggest lesson I learned from, talking about the mistakes that I made was really just being willing to own up to them. And basically, I guess I've read a few books that they've termed it sort of taking ownership or extreme ownership, and I realized I sort of did that back, when I was 23, 24, maybe without even totally realizing it. But just sort of saying, like, when things go poorly or there's a mistake or there's an issue, just being willing to say, yeah, that was me. That was my mistake. I'm sorry. Let's, because I realize with people who are upset because of something, they quickly, once you kind of take the fact of blame out of the equation, like, look, I'm to blame. I'm owning that. Once you take that out, people are like, oh, okay, so now what? Okay, we can move forward now. Whereas I feel like if you're trying to make excuses or like, well, that's not really my fault, that was their fault, it's like you just kind of prolong, I think, the issues. So I would just say to anyone starting out, or just be totally willing and honest about your own failures when you do make mistakes, because nobody's perfect. And I think this is the hard thing about being an AD, is that when you do make mistakes, they're obvious. Like they're on display. When there's not a bus there and everybody's waiting and you're getting that phone call, like everyone knows you screwed up or there's an issue, So rather than blame the bus manager, blame the person who was supposed to get the bus, just, find the solution, work it out, and don't be afraid to just say, hey, I made a mistake. So yeah, I found that that's served me well, in my career, especially when I was starting out. I don't know if that answers the question exactly.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. What else do you do? Because you said, I hope I got a bit wiser over the years. What else do you do to professional development, to grow in your role as a professional?
I mean, there's a lot of ways I think we can grow in these roles, like being a part of APAC and kayak. I feel like I've grown a lot. So that network you have with other ADs in your own country or in your international conference, I think is so important. I mean, I feel super fortunate. APAC is a great league, and honestly, you have a number of really good schools, and I would say really high-powered ADs who are a part of those schools. So, I mean, those 3 years I had when I was at TCIS, when I was, 23 to 26, just sitting at the table with those people was such a great learning experience. They're so good at what they do. And then being a part of kayak, which is a little bit of a smaller league in some ways. It's more of, obviously, where it's the league I interact with more, but I think maybe having more voice in that league, just because it is a little bit smaller. So really being a leader in that group and being able to put my voice out there. But I think you do learn too, being a part of a conference, it's like, it's not just about one school and what they want. It's that balance of what's best for everybody. So I think that's something I learned a lot working in kayak. I think I'm an English teacher, so obviously I like books. I like to read. So, I mean, I've gone through phases, I would say, where I've read a lot on different topics. So I went through a phase where I was just reading tons of coaching books, coaching biographies, Dean Smith, Anson Dorrance. I could come up with a list of all these great books that I read, Mike Krzyzewski books, all this kind of stuff, where I'm just like, man, these are great coaches, and I want to learn from them and hear more about their story. And I think you pick up little nuggets of wisdom from those kinds of things, and you're like, oh, that's a good idea. I should try that in practice, or I should do this, so you kind of hone your craft that way. And then I would say, like, I think professional learning and development, definitely plays a role. Like, for instance, this last year, I did the Fobasia conference, which it was all online this last February, but they put on a conference for coaches and PE teachers. And to be honest, I wasn't necessarily expecting that much, just because I was thinking it's Fobasia, it's more a British school thing. And I was thinking it was a bit more PHE focused. But then it turned out to have a lot of really great offerings, and I learned a ton from it. So it is important to, I think, renew kind of that sense of energy and purpose by going to conferences, being inspired by other people who are doing a great job. I think like this podcast and other podcasts that are related to areas of interest, I think can be inspirational. I don't only stay within a sports lane though. Like I like to read lots of different books. I read different biographies about different people. Like, I have a poster of Teddy Roosevelt back here on my wall. Like I've read a number of books related to him, different figures like that. I like a lot of the social science books, the sort of Malcolm Gladwell, Chip and Dan Heath kind of books like that, where they're talking about social phenomena and why people are the way they are and why groups work the way they do, all that kind of stuff. So all those kinds of things are fascinating. I think sports, what we do in the school, that's, sports is our medium, but really we're working with people, and I think ADs actually have some of the most complex job in a school, because we're working with literally every stakeholder in the community, and with other schools, so we even have, in some ways, more as far as social networking, it's huge. And then lastly, I would say, I've continued with my education. I did a master's degree I did a principal certification this last summer. I completed a couple of the PTC, the Principal Training Center courses. So those aren't sports specific necessarily, but I feel like with the focus that they have on educational leadership, I feel like there's so much transfer to what I do. And so, I would say, looking back, I've kind of had this continuous growth. It hasn't necessarily always been formalized, but always, staying kind of in a position where I'm learning and growing. And I think I picked that up from my dad, because my dad is like that. He's just always, even though people, they look at him and they think, oh, you're kind of this coach, what you're doing, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, he's learned it all. I mean, it's, so much. Yeah, he has some natural qualities that come out in his leadership, et cetera. But, that he reads all the time, constantly reading, constantly learning, going to coaching clinics, all this kind of stuff. He's always had a growth mindset, before that was even a term,
Yeah.
So I learned that from him for sure.
All right. Yeah, those are great. I think that's important too for our athletes, right? Like we want them to always be learning and continually improving and working on themselves. As we kind of come to the end and wrap up, we've taken quite a bit of your time, and we appreciate that. What are some goals that you have for yourself, for your program, maybe this year, maybe long term? Just kind of what's motivating you to keep going?
It's been, I guess for everybody, it's been a little hard with just the COVID situation kind of causing this kind of start and stop. It's hard to get the momentum going in the program. So I'm definitely trying to keep things going to the point where, when hopefully the situation gets better to the point where things are able to happen more consistently, that everything is still kind of in place, So I'm still trying to even build the program, like I'm adding a new layer in our middle school sports to have what we're going to call the middle school select group. So we have a middle school kind of intramural group who they get organized into teams and they play against other schools normally. But I kind of noticed in the middle school, sort of our top kids who are really interested in sports and want to compete, they don't really have a place to do that at the same level. So we're adding something new this year. So I guess a goal is to still, I'm not going to sit on my butt, while this happens and go, oh, well, I guess we can't do anything, because, I'm constantly trying to think, what can we do? How can we keep improving? But I'm also, when I do have space for other things, I'm trying to pour into those areas too. Like right now, normally when things are going full on, I'm so busy, I don't really have a lot of opportunity to support PHE in the way that I should, as that's underneath my umbrella as well. So now I'm trying to, okay, I have a little bit different type of space right now, so I need to invest there. That's an area where I've kind of put it on the back burner, but I can't do that anymore. So I'm investing there, looking for opportunities to be a leader in the school and other areas as well. For instance, last year, we ended up helping out. We had to do a campus evacuation because of a confirmed COVID case. So basically it was this big process of parents coming to school, picking up their kids, so obviously a lot of logistics and things like that. And really the first time we went through it, we had a general plan, but nothing super fleshed out. So at that time, I really wasn't doing anything else because the seasons were completely canceled. I was working on other stuff. And so I was like, hey, me and the director of arts, we're like, we'll take this on. We'll come up with a plan. So now we've fleshed out a full, emergency action plan for the school. And that's the school-wide plan now that we use. So just trying to put our hand up to be leaders in other areas where we can help out. Another thing I did, I built one of my goals was I wanted to have a really nice kind of robust website for our high school sports. So, at one point last year for about a month, that's all I did. I just worked on this website and just poured into it, got it finished. And now that's something that, hopefully can be a legacy piece that we keep going, So there's been I would say my goal has been to just not not sit back and make excuses for what I can or can't do, and just really try and keep building and growing. But yeah, I would love to see when we emerge on the other side of this that we are still a really strong athletic program, that we are still a really tight athletic program that has a clear culture within it. So I'm really, really trying to not lose that as much as possible. So maybe I'm fighting windmills or whatever, but I'm going to try. It's like, I'm not going to give up. So that's been sort of my mindset going into all of this.
I think that's a great finish, Paul, for today. We want to thank you so much for your time. It's very inspiring listening to all these different ADs from all over the world. We are always learning something from each other. And I think that's key here. I've heard so much that I'm like, oh yeah, I should do that too. So that's great. We are not far from each other, Paul. So hopefully once things open up, we should definitely stay in contact.
Yeah,
we are actually looking into maybe working with some smaller Korean international schools over there. We travel mainly to China, which is going to be, it's already a battle for us before COVID. It's even a bigger battle now. So yeah, let's stay in contact. Thank you so much for everything you shared today. And it was a pleasure having you on.
For sure. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you both.
Yeah, nice
thanks,
to meet
Paul.
you. Thanks, Paul.
Wish you
a good day.
Good luck this year.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. So we just sat down with Paul Rader at Seoul Foreign School, Seoul Internationals, Seoul Foreign School. Yeah, Seoul Foreign School. And just a great interview, talking about kind of how he got involved. And it's interesting listening to him talk about COVID, because I feel like it hit us, it hit everybody, obviously. But,
similar.
But there's so many similarities, right? We all felt like it was happening just to us. He had to cancel a tournament. We had things get canceled. They were able to squeeze in their volleyball season in just a couple of weeks. We were able to squeeze in one tournament for volleyball. So, very similar experiences when dealing with COVID, and kind of, we're all in the same place. We're all kind of sitting here waiting, like, what can we do? And I think he put it pretty well with his goal for his sports teams is just to stay ready. I think that's a good mindset for us moving forward. Is we don't know if we'll be able to have sports. There might only be a week, where we're able to do something between things opening up or getting shut back down. So I think for us, just being ready to have events when we can have events, have practices when we can have practices, have games when we can have games, is going to be really important to have some semblance of a successful season and sports year this year.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so many good things that he shared with us, very open. I think as ADs, or sport directors or whatever the name is, we need to try to learn from each other. And he talked about so many things, one example, having the parents and kids together, something that I haven't done before. So maybe that's something I want to start implementing this year. I definitely need to read more books. He's always learning too. It's very inspiring. And he's not far away from us. So it's always great to have someone close around the corner that we might work together with in the future. This is exactly why we do this podcast and why we now go from place to place to talk to these athletic directors, because we have many differences, but also, like you said, so many things are the same. And actually, it's funny that Korea is around the corner. Actually, the COVID situation pretty much similar here. Mm-hmm. We might go somewhere else and it's totally different. But it's great that he was on our podcast, that he shared so much with us today. Very knowledgeable, passionate. I liked how he linked the programs with the school philosophy, and that's something that should always be connected very strongly. Great, Paul. He shared so much with us today. It was great.
Yeah, and I think too, just his willingness to kind of go outside the box, like he mentioned, working on the website at the end, or reading a ton, not necessarily just sports books, but mm-hmm. Books on Teddy Roosevelt. And so I think it is important to not just kind of put ourselves in a box, like, well, we're just sports and we're all sports. that we do deal with a lot of people, and there's a much bigger picture to keep in mind.
I found it very interesting, CD, that he in the beginning of the podcast, if the interview, he was sharing about as a younger AD, or maybe later in the podcast, actually. When you make a mistake, just owning it, and acknowledge it. I think when you're a bit younger in your career, you take everything personal. And when you get a bit older, bit wiser, hopefully, it should be, right? You learn to, own it and then just be aware of it and try to improve it. I think that's very important for younger ADs. And I definitely had that when I was younger. You take everything personal when something happens, and something is something that you can improve on, but there's also sometimes that you just out of your hands. Sometimes things happen, but just be aware of it, owning to it, and then just try to improve it. And I think that's a very good tip, actually, that he shared in the interview. So something that we struggle with every day. Don't take things personal, and try to improve them and be aware of that. So another great tip from Paul that he shared with us today.
Yeah, overall, just a great interview, and first of hopefully many to come of interviews with athletic directors kind of around Asia and around the world.
Definitely.
A good way to kick off season 2.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are listening or watching, if you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe wherever you're consuming this content. And then we look forward to having you with us for the episodes to come.
Definitely. Thank you everyone for watching, and look forward for more content coming up.